Hey, LinkedIn, and welcome back to Business Unusual, a live show where we are speaking with you about how the coronavirus is impacting the ways that we all work. I'm your host, Caroline Fairchild, coming to you from my home office here in New York City. The impact of the coronavirus is being felt across all industries, but there's arguably no industry that is more vulnerable right now than the restaurant industry. With a vast majority of Americans under shelter-in-place orders, the 100,000 restaurants across the country right now are vulnerable, and the 12 million jobs that support those restaurants are hanging in the balance. Later on in the show, we are going to bring on famed restaurateur Danny Meyer to really walk us through what this means for the restaurant industry and what this means for a path forward for the American restaurant industry and what he's seen on the ground with his own decisions. Meyer was one of the first restaurateurs to make the decision to lay off 2,000 of his employees. It was about 80% of his workforce. And he's doing some things on the bleeding edge to support the American restaurant industry and really give us a sense of what we can expect moving forward. I'm looking forward to my conversation with him. But first, we really want to hear from you. The whole point of this show is to speak with you directly about how the coronavirus is impacting you on the ground. I know that we're going to have a lot of restaurant owners joining us on the stream today, and we want to see what's going on in your world. We have some restaurant owners from Hoboken, New Jersey, as well as Oklahoma joining us later on in this show. They're all experiencing this. It's restaurants big and small. So let us know in the stream what's going on in your world, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about that on today's show. Why are we talking about the restaurant industry today? It's because we're seeing hundreds of you on LinkedIn sharing your stories, and I want to point to some of those before we get to Danny. A lot of you are saying that this situation is unprecedented, that your industries are being impacted. We're seeing from restaurant owners across really the country sharing on LinkedIn, telling us how this is impacting them. Here is an example from Alex DeMarco, a head chef in Las Vegas, who is talking about the supply shortages. Getting supplies from is really tough right now, he says. A lot of items are out of stock. The Las Vegas Strip is pretty much a ghost town since MGM announced that they are closing all properties. We're seeing this not just, of course, in Las Vegas, but also in Staten Island, which is a little bit closer to where I am to right now, where we see Julia talking about how this is impacting her pretzel business. Our business operates as a wholesale and retail of freshly baked pretzels for the local community. Wholesale is mainly generated through sales to local companies and schools. We have nearly complete drop-off in these orders. This is just challenging to just small operators like Julia and larger operators like Alex. I want to go to, of course, this is impacting the bar industry as well. I want to go to Anna Johnson, who is in Louisiana. And she says, I get the self-quarantine part. I think a lot of business owners do understand that this is really a public safety concern first, but she's scared, as all business owners are, on how her community is going to recover for this, how she's going to support her family right now. And so this is the point of the show. We want to talk to you about what's happening in your world, so let us know in the stream. And right now, I want to bring on our first guest of the show, Danny Meyer. Thank you so much for joining us.
To be here.
So Danny, I mentioned up top, you were one of the first really big restaurateurs to have to make that challenging decision to lay off your employees. Bring us back to that decision and your thought process mid-March when you made that call.
Our thought process was that it was really clear that we were really dealing with two very, very different topics that were definitely connecting and converging, but they were very different. The first one, the most important one, was health. New York City, as you now know, as we all now know, has half of the cases in this whole country, and I believe now has exceeded the number of cases in several of the big countries. New York State itself has more cases than Italy and Spain, for example. And it was very clear to us right off the bat that we had to put our staff members in a position where they would not be in harm's way once we saw the science about how many cases were happening in New York, by asking them to clear wine glasses and napkins and dishes and work with each other. And we also had to do the same thing for our guests. And so we shuttered all of our restaurants. And once we did that, and we had zero revenue, and we saw the number of cases just going up and up and up, as much as we wanted to be in business, we couldn't. So we donated all of our food to first to our staff members. We had family meal where people could come one at a time and collect food from our restaurants so it wouldn't go to waste. We donated some of it to City Harvest, and we haven't been open since March I believe the last date we were open was March the 12th, if I'm not mistaken. And at that point, we said the best thing we could do, as crazy as it sounds, is to put our workforce on unemployment so that they could get paid, because it would bankrupt us. We had no idea back in March that it would be as severe and as long as it now appears to be. And so we made that decision very early on, because the only way we can be the best employer is to stay in business. And the only way to do that is to get to the other side of this.
You're certainly not the only restaurant owner who's had to make that challenging decision to lay off your staff. How did you have those conversations with employees to really make them understand that for the business as well as for themselves, this is what needs to happen?
As transparently as possible, but first of all, none of us has ever had this kind of experience. This is our entire industry. This virus doesn't care where you live. It doesn't care how many employees you have. If you have 20 employees, you're dealing with this. If you have 200 employees, you're dealing with this. And the other really, really hard thing is that we can't be together. And so if someone were to have asked me a year ago, how would you do a layoff? I would say absolutely face to face. We've not been able to do that. So we're doing this using every type of technology that we can, FaceTime, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and with as much empathy as we possibly can. And we're meeting on a once a week basis through a Zoom call. In fact, we have one this afternoon with all of our employees to stay in touch with them and let them know in real time what we know, what we don't know. And I think importantly, what type of resources we can provide. We have a really, really wonderful team of people still working who are creating a resource page for our team, whether it's jobs that are available, whether it's assistance in terms of working with the unemployment office. We know that that's been a nightmare for a lot of people, whether it's resources to get health care, resources to get child care, emotional care, which is probably the single most important thing right now. And then also we started a fund. We called it the Hugs Fund, USHG Hugs. And the first choice I made very, very early on was that I was going to cut my annual compensation down to zero, because I figured if that could even save 2 or 3 jobs, that would be a very, very good thing to do. And then in addition to that, to contribute that same amount that would have been my annual salary to seed the Hugs Fund. We also sold about $400,000 worth of gift cards to our public, and we took 100% of those revenues and gave it to the Hugs Fund. It's been working. We've already granted out over $500,000 to people on our team, and I know I feel great about that. But what I'll really feel great about is when the CARES Act starts to do what it is supposed to do for the people who are out of work.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of restaurant owners like yourself trying to do the best that they can to support their workers during this really challenging time. We spoke of this a little bit at the top of the show, but Danny, for those in the stream who maybe don't understand the devastating impact this is going to have on the restaurant industry, can you help us zoom out and kind of tell us, what the state is and why this is so devastating, particularly for restaurant owners?
Well, let's zoom out even further and talk about America. So the restaurant industry is comprised of 660,000 different restaurants across the country. Some are big chains, some are medium-sized companies, some are mom and pop, some are pizza parlors. 660,000 in the aggregate. That makes up about the second largest employer in the country besides government. That's a big deal. Now, let's take it a step further. A really, really successful restaurant has a 10% profit margin. Most of us are pretty happy, especially with real estate prices and cost of goods sold, to make 5%. So what that means is you could look at the restaurant industry as a pipeline where 90 to 95% of our revenues go right back into the economy. Right now, that's not happening. And in addition to that not happening, if you think about how that spirals out in terms of the money not being spent by people who work in restaurants right now and by people who do business, our meat purveyor, our fishermen, everybody we do business with is now not participating in the economy. Look at it that way to start with. Now let's just look at restaurants. The very, very thing we do effectively in a really, really sacred way, I think, is we bring people together. We are an emotional contributor to society as well. Think about all the restaurants that you go to that you miss because you can't be with your friends doing what human beings do to gather. And so the business we're in is now the very, very thing that is deemed to be the most dangerous thing we can do. So the hard thing about this is that we will probably, as an industry, take longer to come back when it's deemed safe to come back to work than many, many other industries.
Yeah.
Most of us are thinking right now about how to come back as a takeout model or as a pickup model. At best, I'm guessing that that'll represent about 25% of our usual sales relative to coming to the restaurant, but we got to start somewhere. And it's going to be hard for a lot of businesses to do that.
I think that's a great point as we think about getting the economy back in order. The question of when will restaurants be able to reopen is something that I'm seeing across a lot of channels right now. I want to ask you, though, about the Paycheck Protection Plan. In the past 3 weeks, 16.8 million Americans have filed for jobless claims. A good portion, as you just pointed out, are coming out of the restaurant industry. Is the PPP plan, in your mind, is that going to help restaurant owners, restaurant workers? What are you seeing?
Well, I think that the plan itself is hopeful because it put its priorities right where it should be, which is on restaurant workers. It's really, we have three things. We have people's health and safety, number one. That's why we close down. That's why governors are asking us to close down. It's the right thing to do. But that immediately puts people out of work. The government did the right thing to say, let's take care of workers. Unfortunately, the machinery is completely overwhelmed. But if I knew that the people who are now not coming to work at least had a form of income where they could pay their rent and pay for their groceries and pay for whatever their day-to-day needs are, which are already tough in this industry, that would allow me to start thinking much more about now how, as an employer, can I get back to being a good employer? The biggest obstacle is going to be that the consumer is going to be really, really cautious. Some people are going to be cautious because they've been hit economically about coming back to restaurants. Some people are going to be cautious because they're not going to necessarily feel safe right off the bat about going to restaurants. But in terms of the government plan, I think it'll be a great thing once it starts taking care of people. It'll be an even better thing once it helps restaurants to get back up on their feet with restart capital. Many, many restaurants are still battling it out with their landlords because the landlord has a subscription model that doesn't really matter to them whether you're doing, X amount of revenue or Y amount of revenue. And so you've got some fixed costs. You've got fixed utility costs. This is going to be a big challenge for us. And so our industry as a whole needs to get a message through to Washington, D.C. And I think the independent restaurants are doing this. I think the chain restaurants are trying to do this, which is this. If you tell us that we can get a loan if we hire back our entire team by June, but it's not safe to hire people back in June, you didn't really help us become the solvent employer you're going to need us to be in order to get this pipeline flowing again.
Right. Well, what you're speaking to is the uncertainty that every restaurant owner is thinking and feeling right now with this pandemic. And it's challenging to make decisions both short and long term. Your friend, Tom Colicchio, told CNN that he would be surprised if even 75% of the restaurants that were in business pre-pandemic would survive post-pandemic. Are you thinking that as well? About 1 in 4 will probably have to shutter, or what are you projecting?
I have absolutely no way of knowing how to predict that. I know that people need to understand that the restaurant industry for a lot of people is a labor of love. We do it because we love making other people feel good. And we do that despite the fact that the long hours you put in and the reasonably small margins that you make as a result of that are worth it because of the human connection. Now, we rely upon ongoing revenues in order to meet all of our fixed costs. If you lose those revenues, there's a pretty good chance you may go out of business. And so, absent the right type of federal policy, Tom could be absolutely right about his prediction. And I think what a lot of we restaurateurs are discussing right now amongst ourselves are, what are the kind of structural changes we have to make to our industry so that once we do get back on our feet and once people do decide, look, I can't stop gathering, Zoom telephone calls or whatever, Zoom calls, they're great for seeing people and hearing people, but I don't get to smell and I don't get to taste and I don't get to feel. People crave that. By the time we do that, we've got to have a business model that works.
I'm seeing a lot of comments and questions in the stream right now, Danny, of people very appreciative that you're here with us. Jennifer says, thank you, Danny, for this message. I've been in the hospitality restaurant industry for 16 years. The advice is very helpful. I also see some questions from Dawn and Jeremy, kind of hitting on what you were just talking about, asking about the future of the industry, any permanent changes that you do think will come out of this. Are we going to be virtual restaurants? I'm sure that that's not going to happen, but I mean, are you thinking long-term about how the pandemic is going to impact restaurants moving forward?
I think in the near term, as I said, we're going to have to change our business model just to get open. Think about Major League Baseball and how some people are discussing how the first thing, once they decide that it's safe for teams to get back to spring training, which is, it's going to take a month just of that, then they're going to have to figure out, can we play a month of baseball to empty ballparks and have you watch it on TV? Our version of that is not dissimilar. We're going to have to get our own spring training. We're going to have to recruit our teams back, figure out how many of them we can hire back with a model that plays to empty dining rooms, also known as takeout and delivery. That's probably the near term. What we're all going to be hoping for as time goes by is some type of way that our guests and our staff members feel safe about coming in. And I don't know whether that is much, much broader testing, whether that's broader immunization, whether that's a way of basically a health passport. You know, in the same way that what made us all feel safe at last after 9/11 to get on an airplane or to go into an office building was something called a metal detector. We're going to need some type of detector that protects us, because this is the same story but with a different cast of characters. It's not bad human behavior as much as it is a microbe and a virus, but human beings crave safety. And that's gonna, once that happens, I think you're gonna find that people are gonna get back to restaurants. Ultimately, they're gonna get back to bars, but I wouldn't tell my kids to go to a bar next month, that's for sure.
Right. And I think that's such a good point. It's not just about the safety of consumers coming in and, you know, sitting in restaurants, but it's also the safety of the workers. In the near term, what we're seeing, and a lot of questions I'm seeing in the stream right now, are from business owners who are having to make the shift to takeout and to delivery. This is a question that I have, and you could probably answer better than anyone, but not every restaurant can just automatically shift their food to be deliverable. So how is this really impacting those businesses? Do you have any tips for, you know, business owners who are on the stream right now or having to make that change in real time?
I wish I did, because I think the health situation in New York has been so dire that we have zero experience at this so far. We have restaurants that do a lot of delivery already and do a lot of takeout already. Restaurants like Daily Provisions, Blue Smoke Barbecue, Marta, which is a pizza place. And I think that, you know, there's a number of kinds of foods that people are used to taking out and having delivered. And if I had any one piece of advice for us, I'm not qualified to give anyone else advice, it would be that for every single one of our businesses, there are going to be pared down menu items. And if you just ask yourself as a consumer, what is actually going to travel well, and you don't have to have the whole menu item. You know, our chefs are so talented, and they think about the plating and the beautiful garnishes. They're not going to be able to think like that. They're going to have to think about what is going to taste really, really good 40 minutes later after it's been sealed in a compostable plastic container. And we're all going to have to think differently. And my hope is that during that time, that there's going to be some breakthrough. Look, hope is a bad strategy, but it's a good feeling. And I do believe that in time we will get beyond this thing. And we've got to keep our eyes focused on where this thing is going to go. A year from today, what'll be the headlines? My hope is that the headline a year from today is that a vaccine has been created, that people have learned how to get tested. Look, right after 9/11, did you think for in your lifetime that you would have to carry your driver's license with you in order to get into an office building? That you'd have to have your photograph taken every single time you wanted to go to a different office building? We're going to have to start thinking differently. Are we going to have to start taking people's temperatures before they're allowed to come to work? Are we going to have to start taking guests' temperatures before they're allowed to dine in our restaurants? We'll have to see.
Well, Danny, I know I speak for the hundreds of people I'm seeing commenting on the stream right now. Thank you so much for your transparency, your optimism. I agree we will get through this and appreciate your leadership during this time.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
That was Danny Meyer, the founder of Shake Shack and the owner of 20 restaurants, talking to us a little bit about how he's thinking about the path forward for the restaurant industry. I am seeing hundreds of questions, comments from all of you about what the path forward looks like. None of us have all the answers, but we did want to point you to some resources that we did find on LinkedIn. I spoke with a restaurant consultant yesterday named Jason Kaplan, who owns a consultant firm here in New York City. He posted this on LinkedIn, and he wants you on the stream right now, if you have questions about what the path forward looks like for your business, big or small, you can go to this post, which one of my producers is going to put in the stream right now. And Jason's ready to hear from you. He also doesn't have all of the answers, as Danny pointed out, but we did want this to be a resource for you and for these questions. So we're all here for each other right now, I think is the key point. So hit up Jason if you have any questions still. And now I want to bring on some restaurant owners that we found commenting on LinkedIn about what's going on with their business. We have Gansha, who's coming to us from Hoboken. Hi, Gansha, how are you?
Good.
And then we also have Mary, who owns a sushi company. Hi, Mary, how are you?
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to really bring us down to what this looks like on the ground for some of the small business owners across the country. Gansha and Mary made different decisions when it came to what was happening with the coronavirus and their businesses. Gansha, I really want to start with you to walk us through when these shelter-in-place orders, when the restaurant owners switching to delivery, that announcement was made, what that meant for you and what you did with your restaurant in Hoboken.
Well, so I own the business with my two sisters, and we were actually paying a great deal of attention to what was happening overseas. We were following the outbreak in China, and I think towards the end of February, we started feeling like this was going to be bad over here, and we started just talking about, well, what are we going to do if there's an outbreak here? And we are located next to a large technology college, and the campus moved, I think the first week in March, they moved to close the campus down. And when that happened and we realized this could be a problem, because a lot of those students were actually international students that were coming back from overseas. So for the school to act that quickly and shut themselves down and tell everyone to move off campus, that kind of alerted us to, okay, there's going to be a problem here. So what we ultimately decided to do is close and figure out a strategy for how we would move forward. And our reason to close, we actually closed about a week before our town gave us a kind of a shelter-in-place order. And the reason we did that is because we take care of our elderly parents who are both extremely high risk. They would not survive this. And the reason we started our restaurant was to support them and take care of them and get them the medical attention they need. So for us, it was really about preserving human life and just making sure our employees didn't get sick. It was a high risk to think that, my employees can bring something back with them. I know what I'm doing every day. I know that, I go to work, I come home, I don't, interact with anyone other than customers and my family. I don't know where my employees are going, what they're doing. And there was just so much uncertainty with how you can catch this thing that we thought,
Right.
okay, let's let's just close and we will figure out what we do next. And we just started talking about that. And over the past few weeks, we've become more
Mhm.
comfortable with moving back into opening. Passover is usually slow for us anyway because we're a bread place. So we knew that it wasn't going to be worth reopening with Passover, Easter.
Right.
So we came up with a few strategies on how we're going to move forward, how we're going to generate revenues. And we will be reopening probably within the next couple of weeks.
Right.
And we
And
just,
it would be great to kind of hear from you a little bit. I know that this is a family business for you. What was it like emotionally to have to make that decision, and how are you and your family doing?
so my sisters and I are very much a jump first, ask questions later. And we started up our restaurant in 2007. I mean, we had our grand opening in 2008, and I think 2 weeks later, Goldman Sachs was on the verge of collapsing, and then a few months later, Lehman Brothers collapsed. So we opened up at a time. We started our business at a time when everyone was telling us that we were crazy and we shouldn't do this because we weren't going to survive. So we just come from personally a background of having to go through a ton of adversity. My father had restaurants growing up that he lost, and when he lost those, we dealt with a great amount of financial hardship. So we were coming from that background already, and I think that when you go through something like that, it prepares you for the ups and downs of an industry like this, where it's so sensitive to economic shifts. And our because our main priority was just making sure nobody catches us, especially our parents. Even just making sure our father doesn't get sick because of his heart condition, and that we don't have to take him to the hospital. That was our priority. Obviously, you think about the financial repercussions. That's
Right.
Danny mentioned, we're in the restaurant industry. Even
Mhm.
if your sales are high, your profit margins are low. So
Sure.
it's an issue.
Well, I
Um,
asked that because, this is a really emotional experience. I've seen a lot of people in this stream who are restaurant owners who are having to make these difficult decisions. And if you are just joining us, this is Business Unusual. We're talking about the ways that coronavirus is impacting the ways that we all work. I have a panel right now of restaurant owners who are sharing their experiences of how they're pivoting, shuttering their businesses during this time. So if you are joining us right now and have questions or comments, just want to tell us what's going on the ground for you, let us know in the stream. I'd love to have a conversation about that. Mary, you operate several restaurants in the Oklahoma area. Are they still running? Tell us what's going on the ground for you.
Yes. So when we heard about the coronavirus news, we were ready to close down. I had no idea that when the Oklahoma governor announced that only essential businesses could stay open, that we were considered an essential business. So we have five restaurant locations, and we've been able to stay open. And fortunately for our concept, we were already doing mostly or over 50% takeout and delivery already. But that's not to say we haven't been negatively impacted, because we have, but we've just been able to adapt a little easier.
Well, I wanted to ask you, since you do operate a delivery primarily business, we're seeing, a lot of restaurants having to make that change. Do you have any suggestions or tips for them on the stream right now who are having to switch to delivery only?
That, I think right now, as the way it is now with the third party service delivery options, I think that it's pretty easy to transition and offer delivery services for your restaurant. We don't offer in-house delivery. We just use third-party delivery services to do that.
All right. And Ganja, going back to you, what did you do when the ordinance came down to close down your restaurant for anything other than delivery? In terms of, how did you communicate to your staff? How did you communicate to the team that this is the path that you were going to have to move forward for the business?
well, because we were following the news, we started again, telling our staff at the end of February that there could be changes coming up. And we were, as Mary mentioned, like we were doing a significant amount of delivery takeout. We're a fast casual place. We're not a big on dine in. Our delivery in the evenings is probably 60, sometimes 70% just deliveries. So, we were preparing our staff, just letting them know. We were talking about it and having that dialogue. And I think they understood, because I think my staff was equally as afraid of getting sick. You have to remember, a lot of people in this industry, they don't have health insurance, and their families don't have health insurance. So if they catch this, it was so early on that there was really no talk of testing or how you were going to get treated, if it was going to be free. So I think they appreciated that. And we've kept in touch with them. We've tried to financially help them as much as we can, and we've made sacrifices for that. But I think that we operate very much like a family business. We're very close to our staff, and I think they appreciated that we were willing to protect them, and not forcing them to come to work, because I'm seeing a lot of restaurants where the owners are self-isolating and quarantining and then sending their staff in.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for any business owner to have to make that call. Mary, with your restaurant still open, how are your employees feeling about coming into work, and what's the situation like in Oklahoma?
Well, our employees are generally very grateful to have a job. Many industries have closed because they're considered, non-essential businesses. So the atmosphere and the mood in our company has been very positive and optimistic and gracious. So I'm very fortunate to have a really motivated staff. They're very motivated to work and be able to provide for their family, because many of our employees are, the home breadwinner for their family.
Right. And Gansha, I'm seeing some questions on the stream right now that I want to bring you into about supply chain, and a lot of restaurant owners having to make decisions about where they were going to do with their business based on their ability to even get food. Is that something that you were considering with your restaurant in Hoboken?
Yes, actually, that has been a hot topic of discussion for my sisters and I, and my younger sister, who's our CEO, has been bringing that up a great deal. Is okay, well, what's going to happen when the manufacturers for rice can't keep up with the demand here? Asia's not going to export their rice if there's a food shortage over there. Are we going to run into problems getting flour? So that's definitely been a hot topic of discussion, and preparing to pivot on our menu won't be too much trouble for us because we created all the recipes ourselves. But that's definitely something we're thinking about, because we may run into problems, not so much now, but 3 months from now, 6 months from now. So I think that's something I'm not hearing too many of my industry peers discuss that, but I think we need to start seriously discussing it, because we are going to have supply chain issues. And we manufacture things here, but at some point you think about, this is something also my younger sister brought up. You have farms, we have farmland here, and we can do our own produce. But what's going to happen if that workforce gets sick? Are your farmers are going to show up to work when they have the coronavirus? And that's a very real possibility that we've been discussing. So if there is nobody to pick the tomatoes, then I don't know if we're going to be able to get that from overseas, especially with the shortage. We've heard about other countries are hoarding their food supplies to protect themselves, and I mean that's a very real possibility. It's definitely
right. Mm-hmm. Well, this really gets down to is supporting the community and doing that with both your employees, your decisions with your business. Mary, I know that you've been donating meals to hospitals. Talk to us a little bit about that program, how you set it up, and for those on the stream who are thinking about similar efforts, how it's going.
Our company started adopt a doc or nurse program recently to help those on the front lines that are fighting the war against the coronavirus. And customers are able to sponsor a meal, an individual meal, and they also have a choice to sponsor 10 meals or an entire staff department at a hospital. So we're partnering with 3 local hospitals in the area. And when it comes to crises and supporting the community, I think our state is really great at that. We come together. It's a chance for us to rally together behind one cause. And I feel like it gives us a sense of purpose, because really that's what our concept is about. We have decades of history in the restaurant industry, and it started with the noodle manufacturing, and that is just in our bloodline service, and so it's just part of our culture.
Mm. And Gansha, I know that you've been donating food as well to your community, and I see a ton of people on the stream saying thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and for joining us. I really appreciate all of your perspectives. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. This is Business Unusual. We just had a discussion about how the American restaurant industry is going to move forward after COVID-19. I want to thank all of our guests, Danny Meyer, the famed restaurateur, for giving some advice to what the restaurant industry can see moving forward, as well as our panel of local business restaurant owners. I see a ton of you on the stream with questions. We gave a link to a restaurant consultant who is on the ready to answer them if you still have them after the show. I want to thank Megan, Devin, Matt. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.